This isn't your snack in Awana. This is something critical and important that Jesus institutes in the Gospels. Let's look specifically at Luke chapter 22. Luke chapter 22, verses 14 through 20. It says, when the time came, Jesus and the apostles sat down together at the table. Jesus said, I have been very eager to eat this Passover meal with you before my suffering begins. Let me pause right there. Jesus is having almost like Christmas dinner or Thanksgiving. This was the Passover meal, was one of the Jewish holy days. It was a very special moment where they reflected on, and I'll get into it a little bit, exactly what they reflected on. But this was common for Jewish people to have a Passover meal. And so Jesus went through all the preparations. He had somebody hosting them. They gathered all the things, and he and his disciples are having this intimate Passover meal. So think about it, like when you gather with your family on Thanksgiving or on Christmas or on Easter, it's this special moment where families come together and we're just breaking bread with one another and we're sharing each other's lives. And this is one of those kind of moments. And Jesus is saying, listen, I've been very eager to have this Passover meal for you. For I tell you now that I won't eat this meal again until its meaning is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. Then he took the cup of wine and gave thanks to God for it. Then he said, take this and share it among yourselves, for I will not drink wine again until the kingdom of God has come. He took some bread and gave thanks to God for it. Then he broke it in pieces and gave it to the disciples, saying, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. After supper, he took another cup of wine and said, this cup is the new covenant between God and his people, an agreement confirmed with my blood, which is poured out as a sacrifice for you. This is an incredibly critical moment in explaining the Passover feast. The Passover feast was in remembrance of the Israelites when they were in Egypt, and God had sent the plagues to get Egypt to release the Israelites from slavery. And why it's called the Passover specifically is for a few reasons. For example, when you gathered the bread, the person at the head of the table would lift up the bread and he would say the following, this is the bread of affliction, which our fathers ate in the land of Egypt. Let everyone who hungers come and eat. Let everyone who is needy come and eat the Passover meal. Everything eaten at the Passover meal had symbolic meaning. The bitter herbs recalled the bitterness of slavery. The salt water remembered the tears shed under Egypt's oppression. The main course of the meal, a lamb freshly sacrificed for that particular household. That lamb symbolized the lamb's blood that was placed on the doorpost during God's final plague to Egypt when he wiped out all the firstborns. So Jesus sends basically a death wave through Egypt to kill all the firstborns. But he tells his people to sacrifice a lamb and to put its blood over the doorpost, and death would pass over. That's where the term Passover came from. It's that death passed over their household because the lamb's blood protected them. So all of this, it's not like Jesus is retroactively tying things up. He's pointing back to the Old Testament saying, guys, we've been talking about this since the beginning. This is not the abolishment of the Old Testament. This is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. Everything that we've been symbolically talking about is literally here now in me. So if you're taking notes and you're wondering what communion is, one of the first things I want you to recognize is communion is about a reinterpretation. It's about a reinterpretation. Jesus was known for this. If you study the scriptures, he would take a known act or principle, something that was common to the people, and he would reinterpret it. He would give it new meaning. Even baptism, like Christianity did not invent baptism. Baptism was something that was done before Jesus resurrected. Baptism was something people would do as a form of initiation. So if you joined the school of Pharisees, you might get baptized into the school. It was a ritual rite to say that you're a part of something. And so Jesus took that and he reinvented it, he reinterpreted it, and he used it as a symbolic gesture of dying to oneself and then being resurrected. So Jesus is good at doing this. And so a lot of times people make me laugh when they'll say things like, well, we don't want to celebrate Christmas because that used to be pagan. And ain't you glad that Jesus reinstated that and reinterpreted it and say, now it's my holy day. Like, he just takes what the enemy thought he can use for bad and turn it for good. And so here he's doing something similar, not obviously anything bad, but something that they were leaning on. And he's saying, listen, you keep doing this ritual and I'm here to tell you, you don't need the ritual, you got me. In other words, let's go for the bread, right? He breaks the bread. He says, this is my body, which was broken for you. Keep in mind, his body had not yet been broken. So he's saying all this as it's gonna happen, and it really doesn't hit these guys until after Jesus is crucified and resurrected. That's when it all starts to make sense. So in this moment, he's giving them a foretelling, he's letting them know about something, and they're not all the way catching it. It's like, when you were a little kid and your parents would tell you, when you're older, you'll understand. And then you got older, you're like, man, for real, there's comida en la casa. Like, there is food at home. That is not a joke. My parents were right. So listen, when it comes to the bread, John chapter 6, verse 48 through 51. This is Jesus speaking. I am the bread of life. Your ancestors ate manna in the wilderness, yet they died. But there is bread that comes down from heaven, which anyone may eat and not die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. This bread is my flesh, which I give for the life of the world. So the bread goes from this symbolic gesture of manna, or not, it really did happen that manna fell down, but it's something that they remembered to something that now they can engage in. Jesus saying, listen, you don't got to rely on manna. I am the manna. Then he talks about the blood, Hebrews chapter 12, verse 24. You have come to Jesus, the one who mediates the new covenant.